and welcome to this, excuse me, this special meeting of the Growth and Infrastructure Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's 2 o'clock, so we will start the meeting. I've received Councillor Bingley along with Councillor Stoneman have provided apologies today. So as Vice Chair, I will chair this meeting. Today we are meeting to undertake pre-decision scrutiny in relationship to the Better Place programme, Armada Way scheme. I think it's important for all of us to remember this is a new decision and a new scheme, and members will be expected to direct contributions and questions to this report. At certain times I may seek guidance from my advisors. Should we need to adjourn, I will inform the committee what is happening, and there will be time for us to reconvene. Thank you. The first item on the agenda, I understand Councillor Bingley, Councillor Stoneman have provided apologies in line with Part D, Section 8.1 of the Constitution. This is due to their involvement in decision relating to Armada Way. I now move on. Are there any apologies? No, Chair. At this point, can I agree to the committee voting for my Vice Chair? Thank you. Yes, any interests? No, thank you. Does anyone, I now move on to Chair's urgent business, which I have none, you'll be relieved to know. I now move on to the main agenda item, the Better Place programme. Just so the committee is completely clear on how I expect this meeting to run today, there's been a huge amount of information provided within the papers, and we are joined by cabinet members involved in the process who are supported by officers. I will offer as much time as is necessary for the cabinet members and officers to introduce the report, then I will open it up to questions. I'll load the speaking list and please indicate should you want to speak. But there is no limit on time today, so this is a scrutiny that will take as long as is necessary. I will intervene if questions are off topic, have already been asked, answered, or are repetitive. We have recommendations before us today, but I would ask that members highlight any particular recommendations as they emerge, and we will discuss them towards the end of the session. In advance of the meeting, I received a number of questions from members of the public. Whilst there is no constitutional requirement to hear questions at scrutiny committees, I have exercised the discretion given to the Chair in the Constitution to allow them. There will not be written responses to the questions, and I have informed questionnaires that there will be no response to the questions directly provided. I ask the committee members to hear what their representatives, and if they deem appropriate and relevant, they may form part of the discussion today. It's important that everyone's aware that committee members have been given a copy of all these questions, so they're in a position to ask those. The first is from Mr. Kilroy, which concerns SUDS designs. Mr. Kilroy, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. If no detailed SUDS designs and calculations have been done, how can we be sure that the scheme will have sufficient capacity to handle the roof runoff of any future development in the area? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm sure during the afternoon that that will come up. What's the second one? Oh, hello, Ms. Tarrant. The second question is from Ms. Penny Tarrant. Would you like to come forward and ask your question, please?
Good afternoon. My question is, why was no cost-benefit analysis done regarding the translocation of the 6, now 4 trees, factoring in the chance of survival, which was considered poor by organisations such as Plymouth Tree People and the Woodland Trust, as well as the Council's own natural infrastructure officers? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Director. My next speaker was to be Mr. Thomas. Is Mr. Thomas with us? Well, as I said earlier, all scrutineers have been supplied with the questions, so they're aware of what he may have asked had he choose to appear before us. The next question is Mrs. Steer. Would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Hello, thank you. My question is, if the plans can change to accommodate 2 trees, they can be accommodated on 6 trees. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Our final speaker is Mr. Godfrey. Oh, I do beg your pardon. Would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. The Plymouth City Centre Company, representing the interest of all the city centre businesses, recognises the value, importance and utmost urgency of the significant investment planned for Armada Way. We would like to ask the Scrutiny Committee if you could give the scheme its full support for the sake of existing businesses which have suffered financial losses due to the delays, and for future investment which we regard as vital for the regeneration of the city centre and of the wider city. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. We now move on to presentations. Presentations from the leader, I believe. Oh, sorry, I do beg your pardon, very remiss of me. Paul, would you like to introduce the team that's supporting you this afternoon?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Paul Barnard. I'm the Service Director for Strategic Planning and Infrastructure, and for the purposes of today, I'm also the SRO, the Senior Responsible Officer for the entire Transforming Cities Fund programme, within which the Armada Way scheme sits. I'll ask each of the team to identify themselves. Anthony Payne is the Strategic Director for Place. Julie Parkin is the Senior Lawyer from the City Council. Martin Ivor is the Placemaking Manager and Project Manager for the Armada Way scheme. Ellie Firth is Head of Public and Partner Relations, Communications and Engagement at the City Council. Louise Bradley is Director of ECF, who undertook the recent consultation. Adam King is Managing Director of YGS Environmental Consultants. Lee Ferris is Director and Architect at Studio Agora. Will Hudson is Principal Civil Engineer at JUB. Giles Perrett is the Assistant Chief Exec at the City Council. Richard Banner is the Transport Strategy Coordinator and also the TCF Programme Manager. Richard Barra is Urban Designer at the City Council. Nick Carter is Head of Housing and Regeneration, also at the City Council. And last but by no means least, Helen Trenery is the Project Delivery Officer, also at the City Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to know that every area is covered. I'll now move on to presentations, and would begin by asking the leader to present. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but as many will know, I've recently been in hospital, so I'm technically I'm off sick. but I wouldn't miss this for the world. It's such an important day in the life of Plymouth City Council. So can I begin by thanking you and your committee in advance for their consideration of the vast amount of material before you today. 507 pages is a lot to get through. So if I may say so, I know you personally, Chair, have a dozen years or more of experience in scrutiny and have considered and examined many complex policies, projects and initiatives down the years. The committee and yourselves have an essential role in holding us as the executive to account, and I have every confidence that you'll be able to help us to improve our final decision making when we come to do that next month. Now, I appreciate that you'll have already undertaken a lot of work to consider the results of the independent consultation, our suggested changes to the scheme in response to that, and all the background appendices ahead of today's meeting. And I'm very grateful for your work on this, and I want to place on record my appreciation for your time in undertaking this pre-decision scrutiny of our new Armada Way scheme. I've said all along that we want to have an open and transparent process when it comes to Armada Way. That is why we commissioned experienced independent experts to undertake the recent consultation and engagement exercise. And that very much reflects our values in the corporate plan. It's about us as a council being democratic, taking responsibility, acting with fairness and being cooperative. And these are not merely words on a page, but an underlying commitment by my administration to consult, listen, consider, and then ultimately to make decisions that are, as democratically elected members, we believe are in the best long-term interests of Plymouth and of local people. As a local government association peer who gives advice to other local authorities about leadership and governance, I would always advocate for pre-decision scrutiny on key decisions, which is why I committed very early on to presenting the results of the consultation to scrutiny ahead of any final decision by the Cabinet. I made it clear the consultation exercise was not a vote or a referendum, and we were not starting with a blank piece of paper. But I'm therefore grateful for the generally positive responses we have had from local people and businesses on our scheme, which we worked very hard on. When we launched the consultation and engagement on the 17th of October last year, we wanted our new scheme to recapture the scale and grandeur of Armada Way, to include more trees and greenery, to include a huge and exciting new destination play village for families, to help wildlife and nature, to be water smart, to improve safety for all, especially women and young girls, to have more places to sit, to relax and to eat, to include a new cycling path for people of all abilities, and have plenty of pop-up spaces for retail, arts, culture and entertainment. And over the past few weeks, we've been poring over the consultation feedback report to ensure that we carefully considered all the views that have been submitted. And I can say without hesitation that we have listened. We have been able to make changes that I think make our proposals even stronger. We have also, it's fair to say, had to balance some quite polarised views on certain issues, such as the trees and cycling. But in my view, the overriding message from both residents and businesses alike has been crystal clear. And that's to just get on with it. We've thought long and hard about what we think the city centre needs to bring people and life back to this vital part of the city. And I believe these revised proposals will play a pivotal role in supporting new investment and new development opportunities as we embark on a journey to reimagine our city centre for the future. In conclusion, Chair, I say this. The city centres of England have gone through very challenging times in the last few years. Our unique city centre deserves the best for the people who live and work in Plymouth right now, but also for future generations to come. Yes, that comes with a price tag, but the details of the costs are still to be finalised and negotiated as part of the final construction contract. And I will ensure that we get value for money, but I will not dumb down the design, and I will not sell Plymouth short. We must have quality if we are to attract new investment and to create great spaces for people. So can I once again thank you and the committee for your deliberations today. I very much look forward to receiving your recommendations at our Cabinet meeting on the 5th of February, and I'm confident that you can help us to make the right decision for Plymouth so that we can indeed get on with it. Thank you, Chair, and I believe that I'm now passing on, with your permission, to Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll start with a little health caveat of my own. I'm recovering from surgery on a broken leg, and so if I appear a little bit fidgety or uncomfortable, that's why. It's not because I don't want to be here, because I'm very pleased to be here. So following on from Councillor Evans' introduction, I'm going to talk a bit about the consultation. We believed it was important to not start with a blank sheet of paper in order to create the proposed scheme that's before you. One of the first things we looked at was the feedback that had been given in the previous engagement exercises. We listened and took on board previous feedback, including concerns expressed about felling of any of the existing trees. And we wanted to present a revised scheme that incorporated more trees and greenery, more recreational space, a large play space, improved pathways for walking and cycling, and to ensure the area has a sustainable lifespan. We were clear from the start that we wanted what we wanted from the consultation. We wanted to gain a deeper understanding of the aspirations of residents, businesses, and other stakeholders regarding Armada Way. We wanted to ensure a scheme is delivered that meets the long-term needs of people who work, live, shop, eat, play, and travel through it. To engage on what has been revised and offer true scope for influence. To balance and weigh views, so no one group or individual has disproportionate influence. Engage with a wider set of stakeholders, reaching those not previously engaged. Our approach to engagement had to be legally robust and to consider the gunning principles, the Localism Act 2011, the Equalities Act, Plymouth's own statement of community involvement, and therefore we decided to work with an independent consultation and engagement specialist, ECF. They have vast experience in this field to offer public reassurance in the approach and a clear statement that the process would be different to what happened before. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the approach. Louise from ECF will go through that in a bit more detail and the findings, but I want to run through some of the things we did to try to hear from as many people as possible. As you know, the 6-week consultation was called Let's Talk Armada Way. The proposals and information were shared and feedback was gathered in the following ways. A dedicated project website, email and phone number, and throughout the consultation, that were available throughout the consultation. There were 24,000 visitors to the site and 1,568 subscribers. A survey was hosted online in hard copy and easy read format. There were one-to-one interviews with stakeholders, 4 workshops with underrepresented groups, including older people, parents and families, those with disabilities, and young people. The submission of formal written responses from groups and organisations. Those without access to the internet could also feed back through a dedicated phone number, as well as through a hard copy survey. Transcripts and feedback from the interviews, workshops, and copies of the written responses are all available in the report. To ensure that as many people as possible knew about the consultation and how to have their say, a robust publicity plan was developed, which included the following: social media posts by Plymouth City Council and digital advertising. And as the ECF report highlights, there were significant views of these, including over 2.2 million impressions in the paid-for advertising campaign. Emails to over 250 stakeholder contacts made up of key businesses and organisations, including environmental groups, encouraging them to publicise via their networks and on their own channels. There were briefings with stakeholders, the local MP and councillors. There were vinyls on hoardings along Armada Way. There were press releases and video sharing, including weekly updates and videos focusing on different areas of the proposals, including a SUD scheme explainer, the history of Armada Way, the cultural value of regenerating Armada Way as well. Hard copy materials in the library, indoor market, and the Theatre Royal. Over 15,000 postcards were distributed to businesses, schools, wellbeing centres, residential areas, shopping centres, and to people along Armada Way. Further detail on all of this is included in the report. Myself and other Cabinet members, along with council officers, worked closely with ECF throughout the consultation to help to answer any questions and provide clarifications and additional information for any FAQs. Over 1,503 people completed the survey, and that information, along with the feedback from the workshops, interviews, and other submissions, has been evaluated, and that's what's presented in the report in front of you. I'm now going to hand over to Louise Bradley from ECF to run through a bit more about the approach and the findings in the consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jemima.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lyon. We've got the presentation. Okay. Oh. Share the link. There we go. Okay. I think you'll have to move it forward. Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay. Technology. Okay, so the consultation ran for 6 weeks, from the 17th of October to the 28th of November. And who took part? I'll just quickly go over this because it's already been covered by Councillor Lang. But there were 1,503 responses to the survey. That includes 69 paper copy surveys. 5 easy read surveys were completed, over 40 were distributed to certain groups. 9 stakeholder interviews were completed. They were offered to over 40 different stakeholders. The interviews that were completed were with the Chamber of Commerce, Environment Plymouth, Luke Pollard MP, the Market Traders Association, Plymouth City Centre Company, Plymouth Civic Society, Plymouth Cycling Campaign, Plymouth Tree People, the Theatre Royal Plymouth, and a representative from Straw attended but chose not to feedback. There were 16 full written responses in total, which are summarised within the main body of the report and then shown in full in the appendices. Around 50 different respondents gave feedback through email and through the phone number. The phone number is important because those that are not digitally savvy could read information on the scheme, on the hoardings on Armada Way, and feedback either through a hard copy survey or by phone. And we conducted 4 workshops with traditionally underrepresented groups. So that included older people, people with disabilities, and younger people. They were aged 13 to 17. We also attended 2 different play groups to speak to parents. In terms of the survey demographics, it shows that virtually all were residents of Plymouth. There was a slightly older slant in terms of the age of respondents to the consultation. And it isn't stated there, but actually around 75% didn't have children aged 17 or younger within their households. Most respondents were female, which is quite often the case within consultations. The majority didn't have a health problem or disability, and most identified as white in terms of ethnicity. I think what's important to note on the approach is that obviously the main mechanism to feedback was the survey. It was a range of quantitative and qualitative questions. That's closed and open text questions. People had the opportunity to feedback through open text questions, especially if they didn't agree with any of the closed text options. On all of the closed text options, there was another as well, which people could choose and then state their own option, which people did, and that's clearly stated within the consultation report. We also took the decision within just less than a week into the consultation to take away the forced requirement to answer all closed questions. So it gave people a lot more freedom to complete the survey. And we accepted incomplete surveys and analysed them just the same as all the others. The survey questions asked for feedback on the designed elements of the proposed scheme, and we tried to split it into sort of digestible chunks so people could understand the different design elements of the scheme. And they could feedback any ideas or concerns they had as well throughout. All the open text questions were then coded for themes, and you'll see within the body of the report there are thematic tables so that we can see how many times those themes emerge. The online survey was hosted on the project website, but there were also hard copy options available at the Central Library and available on request, either by phone number, email, or through stakeholder groups. An easy read and translated version was also available on request. In terms of the workshops, we targeted those groups to try and make sure we could reach out to those that might not be as represented in the survey. We held, as I've said, one-to-one interviews with high priority organisations and groups, and they were also encouraged to submit a full written response. An interview guide was followed for any of the one-to-one interviews so that we could gather feedback around nature and greenery, the cycle path, etc. in the play village. But they could also feedback on anything else they wanted. And those interviews were recorded through the transcription ability of Microsoft Teams. Full written responses have obviously been recorded and included in the report. And also, as I've said, we received feedback through the email and phone number. So in terms of the main findings, the first question was around nature and greenery. And you can see that overwhelmingly, people wanted Armada Way to be a green space with trees, shrubs, and wildflowers. That was followed by it being climate resilient and being able to deal with the city centre's rainwater smartly, then by keeping as many existing trees as possible. The other there that you can see as 181 responses was mainly people saying that they wanted to keep all existing trees. In other words, they didn't agree with translocation. And they felt it was really important that those trees were there to give canopy cover and shade. When asked about translocation, which was an open text question, so people could respond however they wished, it was really quite balanced, actually, between those that preferred to keep all existing trees and were really worried about the implications of translocation and the success rate of survival, with those that were happy for the trees to be removed if deemed necessary. And there were a small subgroup that felt that whole process was a waste of money. But overall, it was balanced. And I say balanced because it's not a consensus-building exercise, but in terms of themes, the number of themes are quite balanced on both sides. Written responses from, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Those that said were happy for the trees to be moved if necessary, wanted it to be done with careful conjunction with experts and a maintenance plan. And some suggested that the trees, if they didn't survive, then other mature trees would be planted in their place. Written responses from some groups felt that translocation wasn't necessary and that the cycle path could be routed around the trees, and that insufficient evidence had been presented to show there was a need to move the trees to enable the SUDs. Requests were made for a technical plan of the SUDs to show the need for the removal of the trees. Some also stated that a previous pledge to not translocate any trees had been reneged. There were some groups, expert groups, so namely the Environment Agency and South West Water, felt that SUDS was essential to manage the city centre's rainwater and deal with any potential flooding incidents. Tree canopy obviously was put forward as a key theme in terms of being needed within an urban environment. It was also requested that that it should be taken, planting should be taken into account, especially for pollinators and wildlife, so could edible plants be included? Some tree species were deemed unsuitable and there were others suggested. Namely, the tree of life came through as a tree that was unsuitable within the scheme. There was a request to reduce the amount of hard and grey space as well and consider biodiversity and underplanting. And there were requests for greater clarification on the biodiversity net gain calculations and how the scheme in terms of nature and greenery was going to be maintained long term and what funding would be in place. I'll now move on to the play village. It was a high proportion of those asked the first question on the play village in terms of what their relationship would be with it, stated they weren't interested in it and wouldn't use it. However, it should be noted that, as I've said before, 75% of the people that responded to the consultation do not have children and are also an older demographic. Their feedback is still taken into account, which I'll come on to in terms of their concerns. But those that said they would use it mainly stated that's because they were parents of young children, or they were grandparents, or the business community felt that it would attract more people into the city centre. Those that would use it also felt that it would give them a place to rest with their children and would increase dwell time. The most important aspects that came through quite clearly from parents was that they would want seating near to any equipment. They'd want it to cater for a diverse range of abilities. They talked about disability access quite a lot, that it would use as many natural materials as possible, and would give clear visibility so that if, for instance, they were with children in the enclosed toddler play area, they could see 6 or 4-year-old children in another area and be able to see what they were doing. There was a suggestion that the council speaks to make space for girls, so that it could be designed with the way girls play in mind, because it's very different to how boys play quite often, and that physical and mental disabilities would be considered in the design. Key concerns that came through was that it was too large, so that was for people who felt that they didn't want a play village, saying that they felt the size would make it difficult to maintain or could be intrusive for those that didn't want that in the area. Also, considering how antisocial behaviour would be addressed in the play village, especially in sheltered spaces, came up as a concern. And would there be any provision for teenagers? Not necessarily in the play village, but just near it or around it. In terms of pop-up spaces, what came through was a diverse range of needs for live music, creative performances, pop-up stalls for foods, maybe an extension to Flavour Fest. There were asks that high-quality traders should be encouraged, but also make provision for the local regular favourites. And the creative sector specifically said they would want to work closely with the council on the implementation aspects of the pop-up spaces to ensure that lighting, power, the ability to erect temporary structures quickly could happen, and the temporary structures part was important to shelter from the sun and shelter from the rain. Considering street art installations and heritage was also put forward, and think about the impact on walls and seating from skateboarders or parkour users. In terms of solar panel canopies, flexible spaces and seating, overall people were supportive of the idea of solar canopies and would use them for sheltered seating, bike racks or pop-up stalls. Flexible spaces, they felt that they would be places they would just sit, eat and relax. Picnicking was mentioned quite a lot, and they'd like to see a bit more lawn on that basis rather than just hard grey space. In terms of seating design, sheltered seating, seating with tables, disability access, seating in the play area, high backs and armrests, especially for older people, and more benches and informal style of seating came forward. There was also a request to keep the flag blocks that are currently around the sundial. In terms of the cycle path, a mobility hub, most said that they would welcome a cycle path because they walk. However, also a lot said they wouldn't use a cycle path. Those that represented cyclists and the free text responses that came through in regards to the cycle path, their main concerns were its width, as they felt there may be insufficient passing space for cyclists going in different directions. Safety factors, where it crosses pedestrian paths and how that would work. What clear way marking and education of the use of the cycle path will be put in place. Concerns about it being misused by e-bike riders and especially delivery riders because they cycle at speed up and down Armada Way. Clear sight lines around any planting or infrastructure. The shape of the bends may be unsuitable for recumbent cycles or other types of bikes, and clear rights of way and how to merge at different points where it intersects. There was a desire for more bike storage as well throughout, made of durable materials. Lighting and CCTV. Lighting was welcomed, but there was consideration to be asked for light pollution for residents and wildlife. The security by design code was put forward by the design out crime officer. It was stated that maintenance should be essential. CCTV would help address antisocial behaviour, which was seen as a benefit. And hopefully improved CCTV and lighting could improve the nighttime economy and make people feel less vulnerable. And also it would be crucial that any sheltered spaces would be monitored to deter loitering or vagrants. Disabilities, in particular, there were some suggestions that came throughout. So to consider appropriate surfacing for people with wheelchairs or mobility or vision issues. Obviously the inclusion of appropriate lighting for those who are sensitive to hard lights, disability toilets and change facilities for adults and children with disabilities, separating the cycle path and pedestrian walkway to improve safety for people with disabilities, and when it comes to seating and chairs, that you can fit wheelchairs underneath. And then maintenance, construction and other. There were a list of statements given at the end of the survey that people could tick if they agreed with them. Out of those statements, 926 respondents chose that they felt the scheme would make the city centre more welcoming. 871 felt that it would make it a greener space, and 748 stated that it would help businesses attract more customers. Throughout the open text comments, some of the key concerns that came through was a maintenance plan and what ring fence budget would be put in place. Concerns again came through about vandalism, litter, antisocial behaviour and how that would all be managed. There were concerns around construction timelines and phasing, especially from the business communities. They were worried about potential loss of earnings and having difficulties getting deliveries in and wondering how that would all be phased along Armada Way. There were requests as well as a maintenance plan for an arboricultural method statement and a detailed tree plan for translocation. And also it was suggested that the council should work with groups throughout the implementation phase and reach out to landlords. And that's everything. Thank you.
thank you for that very thorough representation of consultation, which obviously plays a huge part in this report. So it was good to hear a full report on it. I now move on to Councillor Mark Coker.
Thank you, Chair. I will briefly cover the transport aspects of the Armada Way scheme. Members may well recall that we were awarded a total of 58.8 million grant funding for the Plymouth Transforming Cities Fund programme in 2020. The total programme comprises 31 projects amounting to £117.1 million investment in Plymouth. These projects were originally to be completed by March 2023. The primary outcomes we are seeking to deliver from the TCF programme as a whole are a step change in local public and sustainable transport connectivity, improved access to jobs, reduced congestion, improved air quality, and delivery of housing. Armada Way is one of the 14 Tranche 2 projects that make up the Plymouth TCF programme. From a TCF perspective, the primary benefits for the delivery of the scheme are as follows. A new cycle path to be provided to cater for cyclists of all abilities to a standard that delivers a step change in sustainable connectivity. Quality infrastructure that encourages more people to walk, to cycle, and to shop locally, which will reduce congestion, reduce our carbon footprint, and improve air quality. When combined with other projects and initiatives for the city, this project supports a step change in local public transport connectivity with improved access to jobs. Investment in our public realm directly supports our ambition to bring substantial amounts of new residential development and therefore crucially more footfall into our city. A total of just over 4 million of Transforming Cities Fund grant is being put into the Armada Way project to achieve these outcomes. Following a review of all TCF programmes across the country by the government, alongside a new national assurance process, the Department for Transport have advised that TCF funding now needs to be spent by March 2025. We have looked very carefully at the responses we have received to the consultation. In this regard, I draw members' attention to paragraphs 9.29 through to 9.32 on pages 79 and 80 of your papers. It has always been the case that there would be a cycle route as part of these Armada Way proposals. That is why the scheme is receiving money from the Transforming Cities Fund. In order to meet the requirements of the Department for Transport, the cycle path has to meet the detailed guidelines set out in their LTN 120. Throughout the development of this complex scheme, we have sought the views and input from a wide range of stakeholders and industry experts. We believe that the scheme we originally consulted upon and the proposed final scheme meets the LTN 120 design standards. This has been independently verified by ACOM, an international transport consultant who assessed the proposed scheme and found it passed the LTN 120 cycling level of service assessment. This then was corroborated by Active Travel England, the government's executive agency responsible for walking and cycling in England, who also assessed the scheme. Having said that, we have carefully considered the detailed design comments from the Plymouth Cycling Campaign, who will continue to work with and on this project and other cycling schemes across the city. In response, we are making 4 specific changes to the cycle route to reflect their comments and the comments of others regarding potential cyclist and pedestrian conflicts. These changes, 4, 5, 6, and 7, on page 90 of your packs. This further improves the cycle route design, assesses many of the concerns raised in the consultation, while ensuring that the scheme still meets the LTN 120 design criteria. The cycle route will now be more clearly delineated by removing 2 east-west pedestrian routes at the point of interaction with the diagonal sections of cycleway. This will reduce further the opportunities for pedestrian and cyclist conflict. We've been working with Sustrans on very detailed aspects of the design to incorporate specific way marking totems and signage in the paving itself to better emphasize the cycling route. Finally, we will be adding further cycle racks throughout Armada Way in direct response to suggestions from the consultation. In conclusion, Chair, the Armada Way scheme is a key component of our TCF programme and will provide significant sustainable transport benefits in relation to enhanced walking and cycling infrastructure in the city centre. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. We now move on to our final presentation from Tom, who I know has been living with this report for some time. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Evans has already set out, the scheme that was published for Armada Way in October was substantially different to the previous proposals. We spent a lot of time looking at what people had already said and came up with a new plan that incorporated the vast majority of the original Armada Way trees. That scheme sought to balance various design priorities whilst introducing existing and exciting future-facing elements such as the play village and the solar canopies. Our response to the comments made during the consultation on both tree and greenery topics is set out in detail on pages 71 to 75 of your packs. It's fair to say that we had to consider many polarised views about the trees. In the end, we strove for a balanced compromise to achieve all of the scheme's objectives. Our new scheme will deliver 202 trees compared to the 153 that existed before. Crucially, these trees will be the right trees of the right species in the right place in accordance with our plan for trees. The additional trees won't be saplings. They will be at least 3.5 to 8 metres tall at the time of planting. They will be planted in well-prepared ground they can thrive in, not post-war rubble. Every tree matters, whether that's the new ones going in or the ones already there. We have looked once again at every single one of the 6 trees we initially proposed for translocation. We have changed the design where we can and concluded that we can retain 2 further trees, bringing the total to 39 existing trees within the new design. The 2 additional trees to be retained are the cockspur thorn, which is labelled as tree T007 in your packs, and the white beam tree T118. This now means that we only need to translocate 4 trees. Understandably, we have been asked why we can't incorporate those 4 final trees into the design. I can't stress this enough. We've really tried, and that was very much our starting point. The simple answer is that they would be significantly impacted by the construction of the sustainable drainage network, which is proposed to help alleviate flooding issues in the city and remove surface water from the combined sewer. Keeping the trees in place would negatively impact the overall effectiveness of the SUD system, meaning that attenuation volumes would be reduced and therefore increase the overall volume of surface water entering the wider drainage network. I care deeply about trees, but I care deeply about water quality in Plymouth Sound too. We've set out more detailed reasoning on this issue clearly and transparently in pages 51 to 54 of your packs. In light of helpful comments from Food Plymouth and other organisations, we have reviewed again the range of new tree species and made several changes. I'm grateful for the time that environmental groups have spent on thoughtful feedback on this complex issue. For the full details on tree selection, please refer to pages 50 and 51 in the pack. In the right-hand column, you will see the in-depth consideration that has been given to the biodiversity benefits of trees, whether that's maple leaves, love tree flowers, and cherry blossoms for attracting pollinators, or juneberry berries, alder cones, and calorie pear, which can be a food source for birds. Nature is at the heart of our scheme. The final scheme design includes new habitats for Armada Way, underplanting beneath the trees, reed beds in the stream, and large new areas of wildflowers. We're planning to incorporate bird and bat boxes as well as bee and bug totems created from the trunks of the previously felled trees. Overall, we aspire to achieving a biodiversity net gain of approximately 20% when the project is completed, meaning it will become a better habitat for wildlife than before. Whilst I fully appreciate that some will always be disappointed by the translocation of the 4 trees, it's important not to lose sight of the wider environmental benefits this scheme will achieve. They've been evaluated and compiled for the first time in a detailed climate impact assessment by this administration. So that involves improved water quality and irrigation through the SUD scheme, planting for increased biodiversity, encouraging active travel through a new cycle path, generating renewable energy through the solar canopies, and reusing large amounts of materials to reduce embodied carbon. Chair, I now turn to the 10 changes we are proposing to our scheme in response to comments made during the consultation. These are set out on pages 90 and 91 of your packs. As Councillor Lang has already covered, our Cabinet wanted a genuine consultation where people's views were not just listened to, but taken on board where possible. Changes 1, 2, and 3 relate to the retention of 2 extra trees, widening the diversity of tree species selection, and increasing the amount of accessible green space. Changes 4, 5, 6, and 7 refer to cycle path and bike storage improvements, as Councillor Coker has already outlined. Lastly, changes 8, 9, and 10 provide for the inclusion of drinking water stations, increased seating, and a defibrillator on Armada Way. These were all constructive ideas that people suggested as other comments in the consultation. We warmly welcome the idea of somewhere to refill bottles, and I hope it will reduce single-use plastics and city centre litter. Also, as a dad with a toddler myself, I appreciated the need for additional seating near the play village for safer supervision. These are all sensible, constructive ideas directly from local residents that we promptly incorporated. In conclusion, Chair, whilst the journey has not always been a straightforward one, we believe this new Armada Way scheme will deliver an exciting transformation of the city centre that residents and families, shoppers and tourists alike will value for decades to come. It is one of the largest, most ambitious city centre public realm projects in this country. We need a shared drive to make our city centre the best it can be, both environmentally and economically. We have listened to the public and made those further 10 changes, which we think improves the overall design. Today, we will gratefully listen to further feedback from your cross-party committee. Then the time will soon come to move forward and deliver this major investment for our city. Chair, myself, Cabinet colleagues and council officers look forward to answering your committee's questions. Thank you.
Thank you. All those presentations were very informative, and I'm sure they'll help the committee. I'll now open it up to questions, but it might be helpful if we theme the questions around the individual parts, and it might be, the consultation might be a good place to start, but I'm in the hands of the committee. Any questions will obviously be answered. Councillor Lugo, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. Yes, this is on procedure mainly. It's only an observation. But first, can I thank ECF and Louise for all the hard work and all the council officers for those tremendous reports. We are very grateful. In terms of clarity, after the scrutiny process today, we have recommendations before us. The committee, no doubt, will make further recommendations or amendments. Then it goes to Cabinet on the 5th of February, I believe. And then Cabinet will sign this off on the 19th of February. Will this go to full council for final sign-off, please?
No, it is a decision of the Cabinet, so it would remain with the Cabinet.
Supplementary?
Of course.
Could you please explain why the previous scheme went to full council in January last year and not this one?
I'll pass it on to Ross.
Through you, Chair. The agenda item at January in council in January was referenced the petition, which is why it was at council. The decision on a scheme is an executive function. It's not a function of council, so therefore it's not within the remit of council to be able to sign off that decision. It sits only with Cabinet.
Oh, Alison. Spronson.
Hello, there we are. Right, sorry about that. Biodiversity has been mentioned quite a lot, but I'm actually interested in neurodiversity. Going through this kind of pack, I understand that disability has been mentioned kind of across it rather in one kind of swell swoop, essentially. Can I ask what is being done for the neurodiverse community?
I'm happy to start by answering that because some of that relates to part of my portfolio. So it's important to stress that disabilities of various types have been considered as part of different aspects of this scheme, whether that's to do with accessible green space, whether that's to do with seating, and whether that's to do with relationship with cyclists as well. But you asked specifically about neurodivergence, and that's something that we've explored with regards to the Play Village. So we're very aware that different children of various abilities play in different ways, and that also applies to ages as well. So what we've tried to do is to make sure that there is play equipment which is accessible for different types of children. And there's also an area of the Play Village which has been designed specifically around sensory benefits, which we hope will be of particular interest as well. Don't know if anybody wanted to give other examples too.
Hello. Excuse me. Just to add a couple of points, it's about the planting as well in terms of colour, scent and sensory areas that we have throughout the scheme. In particular, the play equipment, there's one green zone that's part of the play area and it's located away from the noisy elements of where the play area has been designed. So it's particularly designed with neurodivergent children in play at the forefront. And the play equipment that has been specially selected are items that create sound, create movement, in particular for certain needs.
Thank you. Happy with them. I'll now call on Alison.
Thank you, Ian. This is about SUDS
if I can pursue that, please. Mr. Kilroy at the beginning expressed some concerns about the calculations on runoff for the future. I'm sure there were similar problems that Mr. Basil Jett was struggling with when he built the big sewer around London. However, having read the report, it does appear to me that a great deal of thought on future capacity has been put into this, looking at figures for rainfall over a number of decades and the projections going forward. This clearly should reduce the number of events of water actually discharging from the sewers. Could somebody over there please address Mr. Kilroy's question about the assessment recapacity in the future?
So the sustainable urban drainage system is a really important part of the scheme. That's true of our scheme, and that was true of the previous one. The reason why it's so important is it's one of the issues which many of us hear from residents and are very passionate about being next to Plymouth Sound. So part of that is to do with water quality issues, which come from a very outdated combined sewage system, which overflows in moments of extreme rainfall. Which, because of the realities of the climate emergency, those extreme weather events are happening more and more frequently, as we've seen again with recent storms. The other aspect of that as well is flooding resilience, because of the significant amount of hard landscaping in the city centre. When those storm events happen, the water is moving across those hard surfaces. So the way in which this SUD system has been designed is to be able to accommodate a huge amount of rainfall and look ahead towards the likely direction of what that rainfall might look like in the future as well. We've also tried to incorporate other aspects as part of that. So making sure that water is being used to irrigate the trees, and also making sure that the solar canopies, which we added as part of this new design, will help to cover a significant proportion of the new electricity from that as well. Don't know if Will wanted to add any more on that.
I don't know whether there's much more to add to that. As you say, the system is designed for the 1 in 100 year return event with a 40% increase allowance for climate change. As we know, there is a climate emergency and we have to design to that, so capacity has been designed within the system. We've incorporated measures such as rain gardens, which help filter the water, improve water quality, because SUDS is not just about reducing the amount of water, it's about improving water quality, reducing the quantity of water that enters into the sewer system, and also improving biodiversity and amenity space, which obviously we are working with on this scheme. In terms of calculations, we are at a stage where we're developing the calculations. Obviously, detailed calculations were carried out on the previous scheme, and the new scheme is at a stage where we are detailing those up as we speak. And so we know that there is capacity, and the system is being designed to ensure there is capacity, is the other way to look at it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to add from my perspective. Thanks.
Could I ask a supplementary based on that, please, Chair?
Of course.
Very interesting, obviously, to read about the water gardens and various other measures in the document. I don't think I picked up anything about the surface materials, whether or not they would, in patches at least, be more of a more porous material, which would allow water to sink through rather than just simply sit on the surface.
Yes, of course. Yeah, permeable surfacing is proposed throughout the scheme where appropriate. There's obviously areas where vehicle traffic suggests that it's not suitable, but where we can, in cooperation with Lee in terms of the specification of the hard landscaping, we are using permeable surfacing. There's also an increase in soft landscape areas that we can utilise as drainage areas, and the rain gardens themselves. So rather than rainwater landing on hard surfaces and draining straight into gullies, which then go direct into the sewer, the rainwater will land on the hard surfaces but drain off into rain gardens, into soft landscaping, which the water then actually, in smaller rainfall events, may not even enter the sewer because it will be used by the planting. So we are maximising that as where we can.
Next, I've got Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a
question and a supplementary. They're both about finance. One's about cost and one is about potential income. So just to warn everybody. So I'm thinking about the cost of this. I've had residents already express to me, as won't be any surprise.
Sorry, Councillor Gilmore, could you move your mic a little bit closer?
Yeah, thinking about the cost of the project, I've had residents express to me, I'm sure it won't be any surprise, that the 37 million-ish is seen as a very big number. I can't see anything in here, and I may be missing it, about cost overruns. Big civil works like this tend to go over often. That may be a misunderstanding on my part, that may be a perception. Apart from a brief statement at the bottom of page 8, I'm not seeing anything about contingency plans or where additional money will come from if there is an overrun. Could I get some reassurance on that, please? And then I'll come to my part 2. Thank you.
Chair, you okay for me to respond? Thank you. So, thank you, Councillor Gilmore. If, in headline terms, the costs and the increases associated with the project can be put under about 5 different categories. And I'll just give you the headlines, and then if you want further detail, I can go into that. Firstly, over the last 12 months, construction inflation cost has been running nationally between 15 and 20% on all construction projects in the UK. And certain elements actually are going above 20%. That's on the back of issues such as unfortunate world affairs, such as the Ukraine war, Gaza, and also still aftermath of things like Brexit are still having an impact on supply chains. That brings in an inflationary element of about £3 to £3.5 million in our estimates, as our cost consultants have currently set out. So that's one big chunk. Scope enhancements, you've heard throughout all the presentations today, there's been significant change in scope and enhancements across the whole of the scheme. The larger playground, the solar panels, additional seating, additional CCTV coverage, additional below-ground engineering works, and so on, additional jets, water jets in the scheme and play areas and so on. The scope enhancements are currently estimated at £4.7 million. Preliminary works that have already been undertaken, including site management costs, design changes, and also the programme lengthening of the scheme. It will take longer to deliver than initially estimated, will add cost. You mentioned contingency. There is an element in here actually around the risk elements of this, which is actually the contingency element. You could use either term, to be honest. And we've set aside a significant amount of risk money. I can go into the detail of that a bit later. But that risk money sits around the potential for contamination. We know there were former industrial works in this part of town many years ago. Voids, there's a concrete plinth which was put down post-war, which we're not sure of the depth and the state of it, and a number of other unknowns. And you'll have seen, unfortunately, through the works that have taken place in Old Town and New George Street, significant underground activity and underground elements were identified once work started, and so all those risks have been factored in. We've also got additional development costs, both internal and external staffing costs, due to the length and the overrun of the project. And then finally, there's some other costs which are, obviously we've got additional legal costs which have been borne by the project, both direct and indirect, associated with the scheme. And then we've got associated costs which have been aligned to stand down to prolongation of the contract, contract management, inflation, and so on. And when you put all that together, unfortunately, the numbers increase significantly. What we will be doing as part of the next stage, and once we've got the final design, we'll be entering into detailed contract negotiations and value engineering exercises through our cost consultants, working directly with Morgan Sindel to look to reduce those costs. I think it's fair to say that in terms of the numbers we've put forward to scrutiny, we've tried to include every potential eventuality and look to try and reduce those costs as we go through further work once we've got the final design approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, supplementary.
I do have a supplementary. It's coming from a different direction this time. There's a small reference a couple of times to tourism. And I wonder if, based on experience of similar schemes in other cities, does something like this improve tourism? Could we expect to see a boost? And do we have any idea what that might look like?
Specifically in relation to tourism, I can't give you a direct answer, but I can give you anecdotal evidence of investment in public realm in other parts of the country acts as an initial phase for levering in further investment into spaces and places. I've been involved in many public realm schemes throughout a number of years in other parts of the country, and it was used in those places to lever in that additional public and private sector investment. And in consultation and discussions we're having with a number of national agencies, the fact that the City Council is prepared to put this upfront investment into the public spaces and the public realm well-being of our city centre is an encouragement to them to bring their money forward for future schemes. And we hope on the back of that, the private sector to come alongside as well. What it will hopefully also do is lead to increased footfall in the city centre, and that increased footfall will lead to a wider benefit for the retail sector and other sectors that we hope to attract and change the city centre from a mono-use current retail space to a multiple-use space for residents, businesses and visitors alike.
Chair, if I could just add that the destination Plymouth, Homes England, and as you heard earlier, the City Centre Company have all indicated that investment in public realm, as we see from other major English cities, investment can and should generate additional footfall, which obviously will support the tourist industry, and some representations to that effect have been made in the past.
Have you finished? Thank you. I now move on to my Vice Chair, Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not 100% sure who this is directed to. I think, as SRO, Paul, it's to yourself. It's in relation to the recommendations on pages 6 and 7, specifically number 8. And I'm looking at the coordination and monitoring of all existing public realms, revenue, maintenance and budgets. Obviously, this will come under the auspices of the required City Centre Public Realm Board, which is going to be set up. And I notice it's from the City Council departments, obviously, City Centre Company, obviously. But I would like to recommend that the elected councillors who collectively cross-party represent every resident in this city to be incorporated as a portion on the Public Realm Board.
Thank you for the question. Yes, and I'm happy to speak about maintenance in more detail later, should members want to raise that point, which came out from the consultation. But yes, recommendation 8 is specifically to create a City Centre Public Realm Board, which would, as an instruction to the Strategic Director for Place to put in place arrangements to better coordinate public realm works in the city centre. And as you would gather, we've not yet specified the membership of that. So if it was the view of the scrutiny panel that they wish to make a recommendation as to the membership of that, obviously that would be something for the Cabinet to consider in due course. It may well be that, for example, other parties like the police, for instance, might also be part of that board in the future. So obviously a matter for this committee to decide if they wish to make that a recommendation.
Supplementary, please. The original estimate from the past scheme was around about 14 million, and we're looking to do another 22 million. can you tell me where the additional money is coming from? Is it capital from the local taxpayers' money? Thank you.
Well, just to make the point that the 14 million, which was the revised budget that was in the capital programme, was a budget figure, not a tendered cost figure. And there's an obviously important distinction there, because the previous scheme had not got to that point in terms of bringing forward a tendered cost figure. In relation to, as the recommendations make clear, the additional funding is to come from the existing capital programme within the existing envelope. So clearly a phasing and prioritisation exercise would need to occur. But what I can also say is that we will continue, as we always do with these projects, to look at other sources of income for the project as we move forward to finalising those costs, because clearly those costs have yet to be finalised. We've yet to conclude the tender process, and we've yet to agree an actual contract for a final scheme, obviously subject to Cabinet's decision on the 14th of February. I hope that helps. If Anthony wants to add anything.
Thank you. Just for information, next I've got Councillor Partridge, which I'll call in a minute, then Councillor McLeay, and then Councillor Lugger. Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'm not sure who this is aimed at, but wrapped up within your SUDS document, currently page 43, if people want to reference it, there are some ongoing costs to maintenance. While I haven't seen much of a plan, there is a plan here. There is a mention of UV lights, solar panels. There's going to be a pump there to pump the water back up because it's gravity fed, so it's going to drop down. The equipment that's being fitted or proposed, is that off the shelf that's commercially available, or like the pumps that were fitted for the now defunct watercourse, 5 or 6 years down the line, is the council going to find itself with a multi-100,000 bill for something that we can no longer maintain or afford? My question wrapped up in that, I guess, is this going to present value for money for the taxpayer going forward if it's going to come out of the capital budget? Or indeed, is it cheap enough to come out of the normal maintenance budgets for this city? Thank you, Chair.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Partridge. Totally valid question, and I can quite understand why you're asking it. So one of the things which came up very clearly from the consultation exercise was a healthy dose of scepticism amongst residents around maintenance, and I can quite appreciate that. So one of the things that we've been talking about at length as part of our longer term planning of this is a very clear maintenance plan which outlines the funding and management of maintenance for the next 5 years, which partly relates to some of the aspects we discussed earlier. The Sustainable Urban Drainage Scheme has been considered as part of that. Martin, did you want to add anything more on that?
Yeah, it just reference to your to the previous watercourse, as you mentioned there, Councillor. Obviously, that was switched off more than 15 years ago, and that was a very complex piece of equipment with multiple pumps, and it had many grills and different chambers of which litter and the like used to get trapped in. So a really key part of the design for the new scheme is that the watercourse element, the SUDS element, is as low maintenance as possible in terms of reducing the number of those elements like traps and grills that require daily check-in, or especially during the winter and when leaf litter is falling. Yeah, as I said, we've been clear that we need it to be as low maintenance as possible. We're working with a specialist water feature manufacturer who have done a lot of nationally very significant water feature projects, and they will form part of the 5-year initial maintenance programme. So they'll be taking over that during that 5-year period to make sure that everything that is replaced that needs replacing, as we'll be checking as part of the tender process in terms of the actual equipment itself. As you can imagine, a lot of the pumps have come on quite significantly since the mid-80s when the original stream was put in, so they're a lot more easy to maintain. The previous system was based on pumps being in very large tanks that you used to have to climb down into. These will be totally separate to that. They'll be much more easy to access and maintain. So
I think it's a point that, yeah, we'll make sure through the tender process that we have all that information ready.
May I have a supplementary, Chair? Thank you for that detailed answer. I appreciate the information. I guess going forward outside that 5-year plan, for that when we tender, we go to the most cost-effective company that can maintain our infrastructure. Other than that, I must give credit, a bit of credit towards what is here regarding the SUDS plan. I really do quite like it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right. My next speaker is Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start off by thanking all of the cabinet officers, consultants, and everyone who has been involved in preparing for today. It is a huge amount of work, and I've heard some of it was carried out on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, so thank you for spending that time to put this together for us. It has been a delight to go through all of it. I do also want to echo Councillor Evans' earlier statement. We do deserve a first-class city centre, and it's really important that we're doing the work to get there for benefits for nature, residents, businesses, and to ensure it's fit for future residential use. I also recognise that this plan is more ambitious and comes with a range of new features. That ambition comes with additional cost, so this question is based around finance. Appreciating the considerations to commercially sensitive information, why haven't this committee been furnished with the financial details in order to allow us to sufficiently and adequately scrutinise this scheme? Will Cabinet receive this full information before their decision is made? And also, with monies now coming from the Climate Change Resilience Fund, amongst others, what impact does this have on projects across the city?
If I may, I'll start with the Climate Emergency Investment Fund that you've referred to, and then I'll leave Director of Place to explore the finance in a little bit more detail. So the solar panel canopy was a new element of the scheme, which wasn't put forward under the previous administration. It's really important to us as a cabinet to incorporate renewable energy as part of this, not only just to cover the additional electricity need of the sustainable urban drainage system, but also to make a very clear message of putting very visible canopies right at the heart of our city centre. If we're going to encourage more residents and businesses to be considering renewable energy, I hope that will inspire some of that behaviour change. In terms of the financing of it, that particular aspect is purely a renewable energy project, and so we thought it would be appropriate to do within the remit of the Climate Emergency Investment Fund. As you'll remember, those of you who also sit on the Budget Scrutiny panel, we made the decision this year to increase the investment going into that after it had previously been cut slightly under the previous administration, increasing the ratchet for that, which has allowed us some added flexibility for additional projects to come directly from that particular fund. Anthony, did you want to have anything else to say around the wider finance? Paul, thanks.
On the Climate Investment Fund, clearly there are other projects that we're still confident we can bring forward, and those have been discussed with Councillor Tom Bryarsdale recently, so I'm confident that other initiatives that support the Net Zero Action Plan will still be able to be taken forward, in addition to support for that, the inclusion of the solar panels as part of the funding mix for Armada Way. In relation to your first question, clearly that's been one of the difficulties in presenting the report both to Scrutiny and it may well be the case to Cabinet, in the sense that we have yet to get the final detailed costings that have been, and a detailed cost report from our cost consultants. And clearly we will also enter into a negotiation with the contractor to finalise the contract cost before we sign that contract. So what we've in essence presented is as the strategic director indicated previously, the range of additional pressures that have come to bear on this project, and I would say every single project in the capital programme, given the inflationary pressures and the uncertainty in which contractors are operating at the moment. They are pricing in significant amounts of risk, and of course ultimately that will raise the overall cost of projects, and it may well be the case that projects go to a certain level that they're no longer affordable or value for money. which is why I suspect the leader mentioned the value for money point in his opening remarks. So we will clearly present the overall figures when we're able to do that. But we wanted to be open and transparent in terms of the scale of the figures now, as opposed to the budget provision that I mentioned earlier that had been the subject of the previous scheme. And you've got the headlines of that in the report itself.
Any supplementary? Thank you. I now move on.
Thank you, Chair. This question is in two parts. Well, actually, one is a question, another is a request. We would like to propose a recommendation, which will be a variation of recommendation 8, which might not be appropriate to do at this point of the committee meeting. We'd happily do it at the latter part.
Yeah, I would prefer to do it the latter part when we have an opportunity to discuss it as a committee. Thank you.
That's perfectly great. So the question I've got then follows on from what Councillor Gilmore was saying. We do have great concerns about costs on this. I mean, we're asking to find another £22.8 million. And when we first spoke to officers prior to the consultation exercise, we were given an assurance that there would be, by using the workers already employed, a very marginal increase in costs. But can we have some sort of assurance with regard to recommendation 6, which states, subject to confirmation of the final construction contract, which Paul Bernard's very kindly alluded to, well, clearly we can't have an open checkbook. Can we have an assurance that there will be no further hike as a result of this contract negotiation, which would take us over the £36.7 million spend? Thank you.
Clearly, the project has to be funded within the existing approved capital programme envelope. That's what that recommendation effectively says. Obviously, I can't give any guarantees as to the overall final figure because that is subject to, one, a detailed cost consultant working to us in challenging the figures that we've received from the contractor, and then two, finalising those costs and obviously agreeing those for entering into the contract itself. And the reason I'd be loath to give such a guarantee is simply because of the volatile nature of the market that I indicated earlier, that there are so many moving parts is probably the best way I'd phrase it, that I'm not in a position to make that statement now. But clearly, in order to let a contract, ultimately you have to finalise a design, and you then have to, by consequence of doing that, finalise a contract figure. And clearly we will do that before we obviously implement the scheme, if that's what the Cabinet wish to do. I hope that helps a bit anyway.
Chair,
Carry on.
Supplementary one. Yeah, thank you for that. I fully understand the nature of budget and how we get to a final figure. So are we, for the record, to advise the people of Plymouth that we could have a spend over £36.8 million?
It's been very clear in this report that is an estimate based on a likely maximum, and that we're hoping to bring that figure down. There's been a couple of comparisons to the previous figures around the £12 million mark. It's really important that we recall that that was a 2017 figure based on the first initial addition to the capital programme, and both councillors and officers were very aware that the previous iteration of the Armada Way scheme would come in at more than that. And what we've tried to be is to make sure that we are transparent around the level of ambition that's being talked about here. Anthony, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. There's 2 or 3 points, Councillor Lugg, I'd just like to raise. The first is, within those numbers, I stated it earlier, at the moment there's an allocation of £6.7 million for risk, effectively. One of the things that we will be doing is a number of trial pits, or the contractors will be doing, to try and get a better understanding of the underground characteristics. 24 trial pits are proposed. those in themselves should give us a better understanding of whether those numbers are actually as bad as they think they may be. So that will be something that will happen soon, and in doing so, that should give us a greater handle on whether those risks are actually as big as they potentially are on paper. So the hope from that would be more detail will reduce that risk. So that's the first point. I think the second point to make in terms of Paul's comment, in terms of our capital envelope, we will accommodate this within the existing capital envelope of the council. And every year our capital programme underspends by a degree between 10 to 20% as an average. We will also be looking at other opportunities for funding, if other funding opportunities arise. We'll also be looking at ways we can capitalise as many costs as we can to reduce the pressure on revenue budgets. So I think there'll be a number of things we will be looking at in the weeks coming to try and minimise the impact of cost. Paul's right, we cannot say for sure that it won't be above, but based upon the work we plan to do, I suspect we will be below that number, which I see at the moment as being the high number. So we will do what we can. We will go through a value engineering exercise. We will go through assessments of information through trial pits, which our cost consultants will look at with the contractors, and a number of other areas of work to try and minimise all those costs to the minimum that's required to deliver the scheme as proposed and as eventually will be agreed. Thank you.
Councillor Lang, I understand you want to come in on this.
I wanted to add that obviously we've tried to be very transparent about what we think the most might be, but it's not, the figure isn't out of keeping with such significant, ambitious public realm schemes in cities. Aberdeen, for instance, has done a very ambitious scheme. It's a city more or less the same size population-wise as ours, and their scheme cost around £30 million. So I just think that's a bit of context around what ambitious, big, important schemes like this are costing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lugger, are you happy? Thank you. I now call on Councillor Gosling.
Thank you, Chair. Just to offer my congratulations to the team on such a, I say, wide-reaching and meaningful consultation over this new scheme. Just a small question on the number of responses. Page 56, item 7.17 says the council received 2,274 responses, of which 1,925 were on the online portal. Does that include the responses that were made from the Let's Talk Armada Way consultation, who received 1,500 responses? So is it 2,274 responses received by the council and 1,500 responses received by the consultation firm, or is one included in the other?
Could you repeat the reference to the page number?
Yeah, it says page 56 of 85, and item, it's numbered 7.17 under the Meaningful Engagement Event, February 2023, and it says the council received a total of 2,274 responses, of which 1,925 were received by the online portal. Later on in the report, on page summary of reach, it says item 8.12, page 60 of 85. It says 1,501 responses who responded to a postcode question. So at the top, 8.11, 1,503 survey responses from the what's known as the Let's Talk Armada Way consultation. So
two different consultations.
Two different consultations.
Yes, the February 23 consultation was the consultation that followed the full council debate on the 30th of November. Then the other references, I think, I'll just check, are from the Let's Talk About a Way consultation.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask a supplementary? So that's in total 3,700 responses from this public consultation. How does that compare with the original consultation on the original scheme? Because if I move up to section 7.14, the only indication of how many responses were received in the consultation of the scheme as introduced by the previous administration was 17. Was that the grand total of responses received on that previous consultation on the old scheme?
I think it's important for us to understand this report, although it does talk about the history of how we got here, at this particular scrutiny meeting, I don't think we should be considering the old scheme because that's still a subject of High Court.
Sorry, Chair. This is not. I'm not really talking about the old scheme at all in its substantive manner. I'm really trying to understand whether the public can have confidence in the consultation of the current scheme as it appeared they did not in the old scheme by comparing the number of responses made by the public in one scheme and the other.
I'll allow the question, but I don't want an elongated answer because I have some fear that it's going away from this particular report.
Yeah, I think there's two things here. So we can't combine the response rates because one was on a previous consultation in February for the previous scheme, and then now the response rate to this consultation is on the new scheme put forward. So this discussion today is on the response rate to this consultation on the new scheme put forward.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gosling, you happy with that? Well, not happy, but...
It'll do. So what I don't understand is why, if we're only considering consultation on this scheme, why there is actually section 7.11 to 7.14 in the report in the pack. If we're only why bring up the old scheme consultation at all? But anyway, we can continue.
Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, through you, the transport money that we've got has to be spent by March 25, I'm led to believe, and we're still awaiting for a court decision on whether the scheme can proceed or not, or parts of the scheme can proceed or not. What is the likelihood that we may be able to do part of the scheme and spend that money, or is there likelihood that we may lose it and go back to the drawing board?
There is a process, as I mentioned before, and I'm sure as part of the previous administration, Councillor Patel, we are working under the same auspices as you did. We have permission to go to DFT and put a change request in. We're not in that position at the moment. Government are very keen to get Transforming Cities funding spent, so we will look at all options that we've got. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I now move on to Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'm not sure who this question is directed to, so my apologies. I'm all for a sustainable build, no matter what gets built. Can someone tell me the amount of, a planned amount of recycled aggregates that this city is going to use to for the Armada project, Armada Way project? If it isn't, can I have an answer to why it's not being considered? On the back of that, recycled aggregates, not only environmentally friendly, they are also a lot cheaper than newly mined aggregates. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, through you, would you mind repeating the question, Councillor Partridge, again?
I do apologise. So for the whole plan, in terms of sustainability, do we plan to use recycled aggregates, sand, type 803, crushed rock, or are we using newly mined stuff? Recycled aggregates are a lot cheaper, and also being recycled, they're also a bit more carbon friendly.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Partridge. If you're interested in the sustainability aspects of the scheme, I would suggest you had a little look at the climate impact assessment, which is around page 111 to page 117. As part of that, what we've done with this scheme is to do a full climate impact assessment on 8 different environmental aspects of this scheme. This wasn't done under the previous administration's approach. We wanted to make sure that all key decisions go through this process. So that includes everything from biodiversity and climate change adaptation to air quality and the ocean. But it also includes what you've referred to there, which is materials and waste. So there's a detailed assessment of the materials that are being used as part of that, which includes recycling existing materials where possible. Did you want to explain any more about that, Martin?
Yeah, just put a little bit more information associated with that, Councillor. So there is quite a large amount of material in Armada Way that we can look to reuse, which, as you said, will bring down the carbon footprint. A lot of those include the former granite curbs. So in the pre-war city, a lot of the highways that used to exist in that area, they dug up and retained the curbs. And those curbs were reused in Armada Way to form the edges of the stream that used to exist there. So we're going to be reusing those curbs as part of the new rill to line both sides of that and the base of it as well. There's also quite a lot of fairly decent quality slabs and sets that we're going to look to reuse in some of the public realm areas. And we're also looking a little bit wider as well into, for example, at Colin Campbell Court with the crushed aggregate that exists there. Using that to form some of the levels that we need in order to create the new topography of the new scheme. So there is a fair amount of material that's being reused that will reduce the amount that we have to import.
Very quick supplement, Chair. Thank you. Thank you for that. So on the back of that, the stuff we import, where possible, I do understand the need for new materials, but where possible, will we be using a high degree of recycled materials from the local suppliers in the area, or will that be have to be shipped in from outside the area? Again, this is all on sustainability. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in the process of identifying exactly where the materials are going to come from for each particular aspect of the scheme, and that's going to be coming out through the tendering process. Obviously, we have to look internationally for the likes of the granite. You know, that's just the basis of they usually come from China, India, which is the more affordable elements, but also more locally. But yeah, I think we are going to be keeping that at the top of our minds to make sure that we'll be sourcing as locally as we possibly can, where we can.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. I'll now come to Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all very much for this report. I should have thanked you earlier and I didn't. It is huge and it's taken an awful lot of time, effort and commitment. My question sort of is following on from visits that I'm sure we've all done to cities and towns where money hasn't been spent, where shops are empty, it's looking unloved, it's not lived in, to compare that with places where we know investment has gone in, and as a result, the local economy starts to benefit. We see money coming into the local authority, which is hugely important, and that, in a sense, offsets some of the cost concerns. Not all of them, but some of them. So my question is actually about the residential potential element that could be encouraged as a result of this Armada Way improvement, to ask whether or not there's any way of quantifying the level of interest there is at this stage from people who know that we are looking to make these improvements, who see the benefits of in-town living. Is somebody able to answer that, please?
Yes, thank you for the question. And it goes to the heart of the point that the report does touch upon in a couple of places about the Armada Way scheme and indeed the wider Better Places programme themselves being part of a wider game plan for the city centre. And the leader spoke about the challenges facing English cities, and we have a unique city centre, which I think people now realise the quality of what was built after the war was very high and is now obviously reflected in the fact that part of the city centre is a conservation area. The report makes reference to a desire to bring forward many more homes in the city centre, clearly to meet our challenges around affordable and social housing, but also our general housing needs. I think the city centre is going to play a key role in the future. It is already playing a key role with some planning consents that have been granted, for example, the conversion of the Debenhams block. And I can say, although I can't actually name them for commercial confidentiality reasons, but again, the report does touch upon the fact that we have been in discussions with investors who have referred to the Armada Way scheme and the importance of the Armada Way scheme to their future potential investment. And it is obviously only potential investment, but those conversations are being had. Lastly, the Chief Exec, the Director of Place, and others in both the Economic Development Department and my department are working with Homes England, who see a real opportunity for a significant amount of housing to be brought forward in the city centre, which itself, of course, if realised, would create significant footfall for the businesses in that area. So I think we have cause to be optimistic about, as the leader put it, reimagining the city centre for the future, and the Armada Way scheme's key role in moving towards that different vision for what it is it can be in the future.
Thank you. No, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask Councillor Bryce-Delve a question about the tree planting. I appreciate before starting that you've spoken at length about this as part of your presentation and that there's also detail in the report. But I have two things that again come from residents. One is, simple question, the Plymouth pear is a very rare tree which is associated with this city historically, and as far as I can tell is not in the plan anywhere, and I'd like to have a reason, if there is one, why that isn't the case. And secondly, reading the report, there's references early on, I'm looking at page 35, to creating a vista, a clear view down to the Hoe, and there's also references throughout the report about creating clear eye lines for safety reasons. There are accusations in the public arena, as I'm sure you're aware, that the trees that are being put in are lollipop trees, that they're not good enough, not diverse enough, not interesting enough, not large enough. Although the report does talk about tree heights. So can you help me to understand, please, the balance between this vista, these clear eye lines, and yet at the same time, this plan for large and diverse trees, as opposed to, if you can directly address, please, the accusation of lollipop trees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Really interesting question, and actually that for me has been one of the most interesting parts of this process actually is the really complex topic of tree selection. It's one that different groups have had different opinions on, and that we've really tried to listen to. So specifically your first question about the Plymouth pear, we're really interested in the Plymouth pear as a species because of that historic link with our city, obviously. It's unusual across the country as a tree species in that it's the only tree species I'm aware of that requires a license in order to be planted. So there are some complications around it
and it was decided that it wasn't appropriate for this particular scheme. But what I would say on pear in particular is that we do have 6 calorie pears as part of that, which we know create small edible fruits which are of interest to birds, so there will be that element to this particular scheme. And just to reassure your resident on the Plymouth pear has been planted in the fairly recent past by Plymouth City Council, including in Forder Valley, so there have been other locations where that has been done. You asked about lollipop trees as well, and it's a tricky one because obviously a lot of the coverage around the Armada Way scheme has been done through the very impressive 3D designs, and a lot of people have looked at those visuals as opposed, and quite understandably, reading this very detailed 500-page document. But if I was to have one favourite page on that 500-page plus set of appendixes, it would be page 50. So it's worth taking a little look at that one. And that goes through the different trees that have been selected for this. You get a sense of quite how many varieties have been chosen. We, as part of one of our 10 changes, what we wanted to do, based on the feedback of Food Plymouth and other local environmental groups, was to have a greater diversity of tree species, both to help with climate resilience and resilience to potential diseases. We know one issue ash dieback has been both locally and nationally recently, but also that diversity for other factors too. So diversity for biodiversity benefits, diversity in terms of appearance. Some of the trees here are smaller in nature. Some of them will have impressive canopy cover. So, if you just quickly flick through, we've got the London plane, which quickly establishes a topiary roof form. We've got the calorie pear, which I mentioned, which has a dense branch structure. We've got the rounded canopy of the New Horizon elm. So there will be a range of canopies offered by the trees which have been selected. And in some cases, specific environmental groups gave us very detailed feedback. So there was originally going to be a tree of heaven, and a particular environmental group suggested that wouldn't be the best species selection, and laid out a clear argument why they felt that way, and we replaced that with a London plane in this. So you can see in detail the exact reasons that we've chosen for that. I don't know if any of our other officers wanted to give specific views on that.
Yeah, not from me personally, but I'll pass it on to Adam King, who will be able to give you more of a detailed explanation on the trees. But certainly the Plymouth pear was something that we did look at following the feedback, and I did spoke with Adam personally about the opportunities that existed for that. I think he'll be able to give you a better answer if that's all right.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I mean, on the Plymouth pear, yeah, great to include it in the scheme if we could, but they're commercially very, very difficult to get hold of. We tried to get some incorporated on the Forder Valley Link Road scheme, but it was impossible. We couldn't find a local grower who could supply them. It may change, but again, you also need licenses to plant them, and also the form is not particularly great for a city centre. You talked about the lollipop tree. Well, the form of that is a clear stem, and the reason for that is to provide surveillance, which is why they've been selected. With regards to the species selection, I think there's about 30 trees now, or 29 tree species that are going in to the scheme, including the existing trees that are being retained. So there's a huge diversity of trees there. They've been selected to be able to deal with climate change. The very harsh urban environment that we get a lot more reflective light in urban environments. The soil compaction can be greater, so they're much harsher conditions. So we've selected trees that are going to be really robust and able to cope with that, but also provide all the benefits. So shade in the winter and the summer. We've also got the bark textures, so the ornamental features, flower, pollen, you name it, we've included them all in there, so it's really diverse, so all those things will be accommodated.
Thank you. Councillor McClay.
Thank you so much, Chair. Picking up on the point about trees, I have several on trees, but my first is on translocation. I think it's really important that this is brought out onto the floor, picking up on the questions of Ms Tarrant, Mr Thomas and Ms Steer, who are with us today, the reservations of the Woodland Trust, Environment Plymouth, Plymouth Tree People, and the majority of respondents to the survey. I really want to dig into translocation. So translocation was previously deemed not viable. What's changed? We've also seen a number of trees incorporated constantly change. Why is it impossible to not incorporate the final 4?
Really important question, and you're right, it's been a theme of the feedback. It's worth noting that was a polarised aspect to the consultation, and if you look at the particular data in terms of the themes that came from the translocation question, which we included very explicitly as a question because we wanted to hear people's views on it, the most popular theme that came up from this, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong from an ECF perspective, but my recollection of that is that the most popular individual theme of the feedback on translocation was actually that there was an acceptance amongst about half of the respondents to that particular question, that if translocation was deemed necessary for the different priorities of the scheme, then that's something that could be considered. There were other responses who wanted to keep all of the trees. There were also some people who asked about the financial implications of translocation. So you mentioned that other views had been expressed from councillors about translocation previously. The previous Conservative administration decided that translocation wasn't viable. So that particular administration said that translocation wasn't viable for them. When Tudor Evans became leader of this new administration, he made it very clear to officers that he wanted them to look at retaining every single tree as part of the scheme. That was the starting point of some of our design conversations. What we've tried to do is balance that across different environmental aspects. And so as part of the consultation, some people said they wanted to see the SUDS design because we mentioned that SUDS was one of the reasons that complicates that. As part of your pack, we've published the whole schematic for the SUDS basin and where they'll be going. And as you can very clearly see from that, the proximity of the trees to that SUDS is prohibitive. The reason why we've considered translocation is that quite understandably, there's been huge frustration up and down the country and in fact globally about how Armada Way has been dealt with under a previous administration. And we've been very clear that we're trying to do everything we can to save those trees. So first port of call was to retain as many of them in place as possible. The second was to think, are there any other options available to us? So we're now in a situation where we're proposing to translocate 4 of those. If you look at page 53 in the pack, there's detailed information about every single one of those in terms of their location, in terms of their category, in terms of the quality of the tree. There's also information there about the condition and health of those trees as well. So all of that has been taken into account. It hasn't been an easy decision. There's been very strong views expressed on this. It's something that all of us as a cabinet are very passionate about getting right. But on the balance of the different environmental aspects of the scheme, including the cycle path, including the SUDS, making sure we're reducing emissions for active travel and improving water quality and flooding resilience, that was the compromise that we've had to strike in order to bring that forward.
And follow up if that's okay. So there is a little bit of a quick step in semantics there. Councillor Evans' exact words were modifications must be made to incorporate the remaining trees, which to me doesn't relate to translocation, but that is not my follow-up point. Can you please detail the cost associated with translocating the 4 remaining trees? And we are expecting poor outcomes for the trees that will be translocated and only looking to replace those on a one-to-one basis. That one-to-one basis doesn't recognise the benefit that these mature trees are bringing as opposed to new ones. So why are they only going to be replaced on a one-to-one basis should they fail and not a 1-to-2, 1-to-3?
I don't have the exact figure of the cost off the top of my head. I believe the cost of the translocation will be approximately £100,000. That will depend on finer details as we get closer to it. In terms of the emissions benefits of it, you're correct, of course, that mature trees have a greater carbon sequestration benefit. And so some of the consideration in terms of the wider emissions impact of the scheme have taken that into account. But we've also got to take into account the likely life of those trees as well, if they were retained, versus new trees in terms of the decades that we'd expect for them to thrive in a more appropriate location as well. So all of those aspects have been considered.
Councillor Rainsford, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm jumping across to cycling, if I may. And to Councillor Coker. When you gave your presentation, you talked about signage, which is welcome in addition to the change in the the road surface, as well as the changes to the crossovers. I'd been contacted personally by a large number of people who had concerns as pedestrians as well as cyclists about the risks that were there. You emphasised signage in relation to the cycling route, signs on the ground. And this is a very small point, but pedestrians have a habit of wandering. I certainly do. Are you also going to have signage for pedestrians? Just to keep it crystal clear, because as somebody who's hearing impaired and who can get caught out if a cycle comes behind me, you know, I don't want to have any accidents happening in our city centre.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsford. If you read LTN 120, all the points that you've raised have to be addressed in that before both the Department for Transport and Active Travel will actually sign it off. Also, we've gone that one step further with signage, with differential paving, different colours. We also ran it through Predan and asked them for their opinions on what we needed to do. So I think we have pushed this scheme as far as any scheme has been pushed to rectify and encourage greater use of walking and cycling facilities.
That's a very quick supplementary, which is, once the scheme's in place, I personally hope that we'll have a review of how pedestrians and how the centre is working for cyclists and pedestrians.
Absolutely. What is key to the future, we're living in an age of climate emergency. We're living in an age of having to look at all schemes differently into how we promote sustainable transport. Our promotion team do house-to-house visits to talk about that. Every scheme that we do, whether it be a walking and cycling scheme or a road scheme, always have 2 audits after for learning curves to make sure that we've got it right, as we did in the Mayflower Street junction, which proved that we amended it after it was implemented, just from concerns from residents. So, yes.
Thank you for that. I've actually got no more speakers at this point, unless someone wishes to speak. Carry on, Councillor.
Sorry, I have lots more questions. It was just at that point, a bit of a lull. So I guess I'll pick up on the planned plaques at the base of the trees. Will these be kept visible and accessible with regards to underplanting? I'm also just wondering if there is any capacity to have braille on those plaques as well to increase accessibility.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think the idea for the plaques in the first instance is that they'll be located immediately adjacent to where the trees are planted, so they'll be probably on the edge of the footways, which will keep them clear. But then, you know, that's a detail point. When we come to looking at the ones that are internal, we'll have to make sure that obviously they are kept clear. And sorry, the second point was
asking if it's possible to add braille to those plaques for increased accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is something we can look at. I don't think that would be too much of a big ask to put into the plaques.
Right, thank you. At this point, just particularly for the public's information, I'll be asking for a comfort break for 10 minutes, but then we'll be moving on to recommendations from our scrutiny committee. So, you know, you're welcome to stay if you wish to. At this point, I will take a
Chair, will there be no more capacity for questions following the comfort break? Will there be any more capacity for questions following the break?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yes, if you could I believe we had some more questions. Please carry on, Councillor.
Thank you. I'm going to try and nip through these as quickly as possible. So first of all, starting with the consultation, I really want to acknowledge the breadth and depth of the consultation process and want to note with all the considerations given to accessibility, especially the easy read version. I was really pleased to see that. I think it's fantastic. I want to ask, what has the council learned from this process that will be carried into future projects? And I also wanted to pick up on the poor stakeholder interview take-up. I believe it was 9 out of 40 that took you up on the offer of that interview. Why was that uptake so low? And I also wondered if we had any data on, I actually expected respondents to have more, and I wondered if why we may think, sorry, trying to formulate it in my brain. Do we have any information on how many surveys were started versus completed? Did we have a high abandonment number, for example? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the last two questions first. So on the interviews, we reached out to high priority stakeholders. We considered high priority in terms of out of 250 contacts on a database, they were very active with regards to the previous scheme and the previous consultation. So we proactively reached out to them to see if they wanted a one-to-one interview. We conducted those prior to the consultation to gain information and feedback on how they might want to be involved during the consultation as well, and any help they could give with distributing information across their networks. And then when it came to the consultation, we got in touch with them again to see if they wanted an interview. Just not everybody did. They just felt they could respond through the survey or through a formal written response. It was up to them. So I know, as you'll see in the report, no greater weighting was given towards an interview or a written response or a survey response. So it's purely up to the individual or representative of the organisation, how they wanted to respond. In terms of the survey, I don't have data in terms of any the number of incompletes. I know the number of incompletes were low. As I've said, we realised that not everybody would want to respond to all the closed questions, so we rectified that as quickly as we could and made that clear on the online survey that it wasn't enforced anymore, so people could skip the questions if they wanted to, and we took all those incompletes into account. On the hard copy surveys, obviously they'd already been printed, and we didn't want to waste paper in terms of printing more hard copy surveys, but there were a few that came back incomplete, and we accepted those. So, yeah.
Just on the issue of lessons learned, I mean, clearly we'll be reflecting as a team on the way in which the consultation was undertaken, obviously under ECF's leadership, and we'll be talking to ECF in some detail, who obviously also provide services in relation to some statutory planning and other processes. So we'll certainly be talking to ECF and reflecting on what lessons we think we can take from how this consultation was undertaken.
Great, thank you. My next question relates to cycling. So I'm really buoyed by all of the improvements to the cycling infrastructure. I think it's going to be a really great addition to the city centre. The conclusion of the LTN 120 cycling notes that it does pass the test, but it also notes some recommendations for further improvements. Will these be implemented?
That will be, we've done some changes, as you can see, in direct response to that. As we're going forward, we will need to look at the cycling and walking infrastructure in the city, because the ultimate goal is to have a walking and cycling route throughout the city. So this is, in my opinion, phase one of that. And I can assure you that this administration is, and I think I have a track record in the fact that walking, cycling, and other forms of sustainable transport are high on our agenda, and that will be looked at over the coming years.
That's what I love to hear. Thank you, Councillor Coker. My next question is on the carbon impact report. I'm really pleased to see that included in here. I did want to pick up on how it has been assessed, how those numbers came to be, why was a score of 5 out of 5 rather than 4 out of 5, because I don't see any metrics for weighting. And also, was equal weighting given to each piece of the pie, per se? Was any considered over another?
Really important question. So the climate impact assessment is a new policy that we introduced quite recently. We as an administration want to make sure that in every single key decision, so that's every major decision and those that require a business case, are assessed on 8 different climate impact grounds. In terms of weighting, there's no set priority in terms of how this is laid out, in terms of one or more being more important than the other. But it's designed in such a way that people can get a snapshot of the evaluation, as well as being able to do a deeper dive through the calculations that have been done. Lucinda Brooke in Paul's team in SBNI has done some really important work in terms of setting this up. And I'm sure if you want a general briefing in terms of how the particular ratings are organised, that should be happy to do that. I think it's a really important way of not just making sure that what we do is transparent, but also trying to encourage both climate and nature to be earlier on in the decision making too, because every officer in every department working on a major project will know this is coming up. And so the important thing for me is I think this will make sure that's at the heart of more projects, including very much Armada Way.
Sorry. Public toilets, I want to pick up on this point as well. So I note that works are being undertaken to the exterior of our public toilets, but not the interior. I think it will be a bit of a shame to have a lovely, shiny new high street, but with old public toilets that are in desperate need of some refreshment. I know that there is an intention to update these at a later point, and I wondered whether that work could be brought forward and implemented as part of the Armada Way Better Places scheme.
Well, obviously that is going to add to the overall cost of the scheme is the first point to make. And in discussions with Councillor Lowry, the view was taken that we needed to look at the refurbishment of the interior of the toilets as a separate project and look for funding for that as a separate scheme. It was considered as part of this scheme, but obviously there are other pressures on the budget that we've highlighted. So the exterior will be enhanced, but consideration will be given to that as part of a separate project that will need to be developed in the future.
Thank you. Actually, I think the rest of mine fall under recommendations, so I'll save you my voice for now.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, question, if I may, for Councillor Lang, and it's a bit of a trying to bring everything together from my perspective. I've followed the debate from the beginning, from the first scheme, and that's as far as my mention of that will go today, right the way through to today. And we've heard, understandably, a lot of questions about the detail. Sustainability, finance, the interaction between pedestrians and cyclists and so forth. But as Deputy Leader, what would you want to be the vision going forward? Because this is something that we're looking to spend a lot of money on for the city, and that the city is going to have to interact with and coexist with for hopefully generations to come. So what's your vision going forward? What would you say to people of Plymouth in those terms?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I suppose it's about being ambitious, isn't it? It's about being ambitious for our city. And I think I understand why the questions have come up around the money. Of course, this is public money, and we need to justify why we're proposing to spend what we're proposing. But I think it's really important to say that we're not being profligate, we're being realistic about what a first-class scheme will cost. And I think Plymouth deserves it. You know, Plymouth's really beginning to get noticed. We appear in those, you know, hidden gem articles in national newspapers. And we want a city centre that really reflects our ambition. Paul mentioned around Destination Plymouth, they've got really ambitious plans about increasing the number of cruise ships that come to our city. Don't we want to be taking them to an incredible city centre? I think, you know, things are really looking up in the city centre. I can just go through a few projects. You know, we're nearing the end of the work to transform Civic Square. We're working with Historic England on that project and a clean-up project that we've seen. And we've actually seen, if we can use social media as a measure of how much residents appreciate that kind of thing, those do, and Ellie will back me up, those do enormous numbers on our social media because people like us doing things that show that we're taking pride in our city. There's so much going on, and I think Armada Way deserves a first-class regeneration which matches the height of what we're aiming to do for the city. I mentioned Aberdeen earlier. The George Street project in Edinburgh in 2021 cost around £32 million. So I would say, you know, if it's good enough for Aberdeen, if it's good enough for Edinburgh, then it's good enough for Plymouth.
Thank you. Have I no more speakers? We now move on to recommendations. Ross, have you picked up any on the way? Or is there any recommendations you want to make from the floor at this point, please?
Through you, Chair, I think there was just one Councillor Lugger referred to. Well, in that case, Chair, I think we should just hear from members.
Yes, Councillor Lugger first, please.
Thank you. Two recommendations, so we'll deal with each one in turn, presumably, so we can deliberate. The first one is to recommendation 8, an amendment to the already established recommendation 8, where we add the words, bear with me one second, so after the words city centre company, we add the words and cross-party political representation. I'll take on board what Paul Bernard said, that other consultees may join in the equation, but I think the recommendation at this scrutiny level is that we have cross-party representation on that board.
Yes, the time-honoured method of recommendations is normal, that Ross will write them out and email them, and you... Sorry? Well, no, not today, but we'll do it in the coming week. Or do you want it today? No. You know, the time-honoured way is where we've always finalised them by email, so hope you're happy with that. Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. My first recommendation, I was really pleased to see that drinking water fountains will be implemented as part of the design as one of the recommendations. Really pleased that one's been listened to. I was also wondering if the council can commit to making all of the bins, with the exception of dog waste bins, have recycling facilities. I did note a lack of recycling facilities at our Christmas fair, and I think it'd be good to set that standard right from the out with Armada Way.
Yes, Tom, if you want to respond to that.
I completely respect for the committee to make any recommendations they feel necessary, but if it helps for the deliberations of the committee, that is a point I've already raised with the team, that for every refuse bin, we need to have commensurate recycling facilities as part of that. But that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't put it in for recommendation as well, but just as a point of clarity. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sure all members are aware that recommendations are exactly that, recommendations, and the Cabinet is in a position to accept or reject them. Are there any more? Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to see consideration be given to outdoor gym equipment within the plans for play. I think it's really good to have facilities from toddlers right through to OAPs, and I think an outdoor gym would add to that. Are they already included in the plan? Have I missed it? No. Also, in relation to bird boxes and bug hotels, I think it's really important to help create community cohesion after a really divisive process with Armada Way, so I'd love to see some community painting events for those facilities.
Thank you. Okay, you read them out in a minute. Councillor Lugger.
Thank you, Chair. Take on board exactly what Paul Bernard said about putting a final figure on the overall spend of the project. In the terms of public accountability and also from a sort of audit point of view, could we suggest a small wording at the end? I fully understand all the ramifications of what was said this afternoon, that we add the words at the end of recommendation 6, provided always that best endeavours will be applied to keeping the project within the maximum spend allocation.
If I'm honest, I would take that as a given anyway, but by all means include it. Yes, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you. I'm still thinking about tourism, and this is a big amount of money, and of course we need to make Plymouth fabulous because we want it to be fabulous because we live here and because it may bring in more tourist revenue. Is there some way of finding out after a financial effect that this improvement had? I don't know. I'm thinking of, you know better than I do how to track it. Is there some way to track the increase that we see?
I guess most of this will come back to scrutiny to review all these decisions at some time in the future. So would you accept that that's covered by scrutiny reviewing it?
I want to agree with you to be nice, but at the same time, I'm thinking there must be some formal way of finding out what financial increases were a result of a project. There must be, I don't know. It's quite clear that I don't know what the answer to this question is that I'm raising, but nonetheless.
Okay, thank you for that. You've made so far.
Well, thank you, Chair. It's just an addition to recommendation 8 concerning the City Centre Public Realm Board to add cross-party membership. That bin facilities are, have the recycling facilities alongside or as part. Consideration to be given to outdoor gym equipment in the play areas. Now, this one is where I got a little bit lost, so I do apologise, Councillor. Consideration of community painting events, engagement. We'll come up with some words on that part, Chair. Councillor Luggers mentioned best endeavours to keep within the maximum spend. Of course, we always try to do that, Councillor, but we'll add it to the list. Considerations to the way we review the impact of the scheme down the line. Now, I think that could be done both at Cabinet and here in the future. But we'll make that recommendation to Cabinet. I think it might come out in the response to, or at least a final decision on the 19th. Chair, that's what we've gathered. There's another one. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you so much for sifting through those. There was 2 of mine from earlier, one of which relates to improving the 1-to-1 ratio for failed translocated trees, and another one to consider adding Braille to the tree plaques. Thank you.
Councillor Swanson.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about appropriate signage on other kind of attractions within the city. Are we going to have signage that's going to direct to this area or vice versa? No, it's a question, no, but can I have signage that will recommend?
Of course, can also reply to that via email rather than us go back to questions at this point.
That would be part of the refresh we always do of our wayfinding strategy anyway, so that would be taken outside of this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Chair, not seeing any more hands. So just to go back then, recommendation 8 concerning cross-party membership of the City Centre Public Realm Board, bins to have recycling facilities, consideration to be given outdoor gym equipment, consideration of community engagement style events, best endeavours to keep within the maximum spend, consider a way to review the impact and I think report back to scrutiny, improve one-to-one ratios for failed translocated trees, braille plaques are the specific recommendations that I've captured following that. I wonder, Chair, though, if there's a general position the committee wanted to take either on the consultation or the wider scheme.
Presumably you'll tidy them up and we'll have a round robin of emails so that committee members are absolutely clear about that. Oh yeah, I'll go into that. I guess it's time for the committee to commit to this because we've had a really full and inclusive report, and I think I would be asking the committee now to actually, with a show of hands, vote on their full support for this scheme going forward to the Cabinet. Thank you. Any against? Abstentions? One abstention. Thank you. Just for the record, we need it for the minutes. Are there any comments on the consultation that you wish to make at this point? Right. Thank you. Okay. That's sorry, Will.
Could we thank all the members of the public that helped feed in. There's lots of information into the consultation. There's lots of good information there. I read this using a reader, and there's been lots of interesting things I've learned. Not necessarily about things that are my forte, but it's been very. So I thank all the people that have taken part in some of the groups. I think did workshops and all sorts to talk about elements of the design. So just
thank you for that reminder, Will. Thank you. Yes, of course, we thank the public, and without the public, this report would be rather empty, I suspect. And what I would like to do is thank all the officers who have contributed to this report, which is really quite difficult for a scrutiny committee because you answered most of the questions before they were asked in this report. So I'd commend that as an example of best practice, exactly. I'd like to take this opportunity now to thank all the people that's contributed to this afternoon. I think it's been a really good scrutiny. You know, we've had questions from the public, which all of you incorporated in your questions. And we've had a fine presentation from our cabinet colleagues in response to this report. So I think by and large, I would commend this kind of exercise as best practice. And I appreciate all the contributions from the members.
Can I say it's been reasonably well chaired as well? So thank you for your stewardship, Ian.
And at this point, at that point, I'll draw it to a close.